What's up, Military Millionaires? I'm your host, David Perret, and we are here today with Aaron Amuchastegui, the real estate rock star, who is coming to us live from Austin, Texas, a house flipper for, 15, 20 years, who's been buying foreclosures and has been just crushing it in the real estate space for a long time. He hosts the Real Estate Rockstar podcast, and finally got to meet him in person in Tahoe 2 weeks ago at the GoBundance Winter Mastermind event. And we had a good long conversation, and he opened my eyes to a couple things. We enjoyed, at least I enjoyed talking, and he did not hate it enough that he said no when I asked him to be on my podcast. And so here we are. And Aaron, thank you very much for joining me today.
Yeah. And here we are. It was really cool to meet you, man. For listeners, we're at this event. There's probably 200 people in there. Maybe 250. It's one of the biggest GoBundance events we've ever had. Sold out in like a week. It was crazy. And one of the first exercises was essentially like ask these 5 questions and go find somebody completely at random in the room. And we're like walking through, and there's people everywhere just like matching. And I had never met David before, and we just matched up. And as we started chatting, we were like, wait, I do know you.
Yep.
We knew each other from online, from the podcast, from Military to Millionaire, it started really clicking, and for both of us. So we really enjoyed getting to meet, although at those events it's brief, and we thought what a better way to get to know each other better than to like come on the podcast and get to chat. So I really appreciate the invite.
Hey, everybody. If you have not heard yet, we are doing a live in-person real estate event May 19th through the 21st in Tampa, Florida. I would love to see you there. We have 50 slots, 13 are already sold. And it's only open for War Room Mastermind members. So if you are a War Room member, make sure you head on over to the Circle community and grab your ticket right now. Secure your spot. If you are not in the War Room Mastermind and you've been thinking about it, hit me up so I can get you that Mastermind application, and you can get enrolled and get a spot because they're selling quickly. We only announced the spots 2 days ago, and like I said, 13 of the 50 are already gone. So I'd love to have you there. We're going to have some really cool speakers. We're going to do some happy hour, some drinks, some hangouts, some networking, some restaurants, some really cool speakers, guest speakers, keynote, whatever. And we're going to do some property tours and some cold plunges and sauna action. So good times for all. Come hang out. See you in Tampa. Yeah, absolutely. And I've listened to the show a few times and enjoy the content you put out. And we have mutual connections, mutual friends. And so this is definitely, it's a good time, and I appreciate you coming on. So why don't you give the listeners, I'm sure there are at least 1 or 2 listeners who have never heard of you before, which is just a shame. So could you give a little bit of the backstory and an introduction to who you are and just bring us up to speed?
Yeah. The little backstory. I keep trying to get the elevator pitch shorter and shorter. I never know how long.
It's hard. The older you get, the longer it seems to get.
The older you get, the longer it gets. You figure out which parts are most important. I'm going to start in the real estate part of my world, right? So I grew up in construction and real estate. Through that process, kind of took time I was working, took time off. Had a bunch of pivots in the world. Went back to college and studied construction management, and I graduated from college when I was 25 years old. So after like a few years off and on in there, you're not supposed to graduate at 25. I graduated, most people get out of there by like 21, 22. I partied too much. I made some bad decisions. So 25 is when I finished. But it was really, really perfect because that was 2005. That was the height of the housing boom. I had studied construction management at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, which was like the best school in the country for construction management at the time. I was also graduating in Southern California at the height of the housing boom. So it was like heavily recruited. So 2005, like I graduate from college. I'm getting paid 6 figures a year. I'm running operations for this home builder company. And man, it was like the land of milk and honey. We were building these houses in like 60 days. Before they were done, buyers had already, bought them, essentially. We were golfing like 2 days a week. It was like this fine-oiled machine. It was ridiculous. It was the wrong expectation of what life was going to be like in real estate. I tell you that much. For a 25-year-old kid, like, well, I graduated from college, now I have my cush job, and I'm off to the races. My life is easy.
Yeah.
Market crashed like 2 years later. Pretty quickly and I didn't really see it at the time because we were in the Central Coast market like Santa Barbara, where it was not really getting impacted as much. But the company I worked for had, hundreds of homes in Northern California, in Modesto and Sacramento, and kind of like ground zero for foreclosure. So one weekend they called me and they said, hey, we just laid off 70 people. There's 5 of you guys left. It's like the 3 owners, the cousin and me. And hey, you got to move from beautiful Santa Barbara to Sacramento next week if you want to keep your job. And when I got up there, I learned what was going on with foreclosures because I drove through these neighborhoods where they had hundreds of houses and properties are abandoned and, weeds are 6 feet tall. And it was crazy. It was like the movies, but worse. It was just absolutely like you couldn't really fathom it unless you saw it. And we were trying to do all sorts of stuff. We went from, golfing a couple days a week to we were putting our bags on and we were doing the cleanup ourselves. We were like, essentially we spent the next year trying to do these bank workouts for the owners where we had all these houses that were like halfway finished. Trades wouldn't do work for us anymore because we didn't have any money to pay the bills. And the owners were just trying to not get, foreclosed on or get all their personal assets taken by the banks. And so we were doing all these workouts where the banks essentially realized like, okay, your loan on this house is $700,000. Houses in that neighborhood are only selling for $300,000. We know we're not going to get made whole. They didn't want to foreclose and then have to start over. So the deal they kind of made was like, you guys do the best you can to sell them for as much as you possibly can. And then once they're sold, we're not going to go after them personally. And so it was like us working hard to sell houses for $250,000, $300,000. 2009. So that was like 2008, beginning of 2009. We're still trying all these different businesses. We did some work for like a hotel in Napa because we were like, well, maybe it was all these pivots. Well, so we can no longer be a home builder. What skills do we have? We were good at like rounding up trades. So we started like finding residential trades and bidding on commercial jobs because commercial contractors were predominantly more expensive. So we could use our residential framers, do the commercial jobs, do a markup and make money that way. We kind of got through 2009 with part of that. And then we discovered this courthouse step foreclosure auction business. And we kind of discovered it because we saw that like REOs were happening. So REOs of foreclosure. We'd drive by, there's a for sale sign for foreclosure. We'd go to the open house. There were like holes in the wall and like paint. But we were like, this just needs a little bit of fix up and someone would want to buy it. There were a lot of buyers at the time that wanted to buy houses for $250,000. But a lot of sellers that were still stuck at that $700,000 price point. So couldn't unless it got foreclosed on or unless it became a short sale. So we wanted to essentially become house flippers, but we kept making offers on all these foreclosures, on all these REOs. And it didn't matter what we did. They always had a better offer. And it was like, we'd make an offer on the second day. They go, we already accepted one. So then we got to the point where we'd make offers 5 seconds after the listing came out. We just figured out our own system. They already had an accepted offer. We found out later they just had their own like people that they were selling these houses to because they knew they were going to sell it to that person for $200,000 and that person was going to fix it for $10,000 and then hire them again to list it for $250 or $260, whatever the deal was. So we couldn't get our foot in the door on doing that. And again, we were like, what skills do we have that are transferable? And housing was just where we stuck because the hotel thing worked for a little while. We discovered the courthouse step auctions by kind of like reading about, what happens, what the foreclosure really, how does it really work? There were no classes about it. Nobody was really teaching it. There was a website at the time called Foreclosure Radar that kind of posted like, hey, this is scheduled for foreclosure. But nobody really knew what that meant. So I went to the courthouse. I started reading all the documents, learning what that would be like. And on the actual loan document, it says like on such and such day, there will be there's a notice of default. This person hasn't made their payment on such and such day. There's a foreclosure auction. We showed up at that address and got to watch it. And we got to start watching foreclosures happen. And we were like, whoa, this is a trip. A couple weeks later, we were able to buy our first foreclosure at auction. That was a really kind of fun story. We had done the research. We had said like, okay, so it's a first lien. We went and looked at the property. The owner of our company owned the house next door. That was kind of what got us into it. And he said, man, if you could get it for this price, that's a great deal. And we show up with cashier's checks and a guy comes in on a skateboard. His name's Eddie. He puts his laptop on a trash can and he starts calling out bids. And the same 2 or 3 people that we saw there the week prior were there like buying houses. And the address for this one comes up and he goes, anyone want it? Going once, going twice. And we kind of raise our hand and he goes, do you want to bid? And we go, yeah. He goes, do you want to bid a penny over? Yeah. And he goes, going once, going twice, sold. And then the other 3 people there did a gasp like, and we're already terrified. We have no money. We barely had enough money for those cashier's checks just from that hotel job, really. And so we're like terrified. We're scared for the next couple of weeks. Like, are we actually going to get it? We ask him like, hey, why doesn't this receipt say the address on it? And he goes, because you're buying a a note, you're foreclosing on a note. We don't put the addresses. We don't even know what address it is. And so we were terrified for the next 2 weeks. But long story short was 2 weeks later, we get a deed. We record the deed. We bought that house for, I think, like $120,000. There was somebody living in the house. We paid them $4,000 to move out. We paid our painter to go paint it. We paid our cleaners to go clean it. We sold it for $200,000 like a couple weeks later. And it was in a market like today where it was like a buyer's market. Stuff wasn't selling very fast. But we learned that if you could bring a property to market that was turnkey, move-in ready, that a first-time home buyer wouldn't have to put any money into it, and if you could bring it at a price they could actually afford, a first-time home buyer will pay you whatever they can. They will buy the biggest house they possibly can. They will give you as much of their paycheck as the lender will let them, but they're still capped out somewhere. Yep. So as long as you can bring something to market at that price, very quickly over the next 3 years, I turned it into a really large flipping machine. I still did it with them for a little bit. My second daughter was born 6 weeks early. She was born premature. When she was up like in the hospital, with the bubblers attached to her mouth, I was thinking, man, this is my fault. My wife was 9 months pregnant. She was working at a casino as a waitress because we were just struggling because I had this big pay cut. That was my moment to quit my job and become the entrepreneur. Over the next few years, flipped like 1,000 houses. We didn't keep any as rentals. We flipped them. We built it as a fund. We ran it like a home builder. It was an amazing, crazy, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. In 2012, 2013, Blackstone came into that market. And they started buying rentals. I had a chance to work with them, but I didn't really know who Blackstone was. I was too young and too cocky. I didn't have mentors that warned me about that. So I didn't take advantage of that knowledge when I could have. They put me out of business in 2013. And I remember I had a couple years of like some real trying times. 2015, I discovered an auction out in Texas. And that time, I went out there to go buy like an apartment complex. I went to auction and I got scared. I got cold feet because I hadn't bought a house in like a couple years. And I remember calling my wife going, man, I got cold feet. She's like, we couldn't even afford the Southwest ticket that you were on to get out there. Like, what do you mean you didn't bid? So I'm like pretty sad, pretty bummed out. And then all of a sudden another trustee shows up and he sells like 50 houses and nobody's standing there. And I was like, this is exactly like California 2009. It's essentially my second chance. When I bought my first house in California in 2009, there was 3 people at auction and like 100 houses sold. When I got put out of business in 2012, 2013, there was like 3 houses going to sale and 100 bidders. Yep. So you were no longer going to get a deal. When I found California in 2015, there's 100 houses going to sale, no bidders. Next month I flew out. I said, maybe I got a big opportunity out here. Next month I flew out on a Friday. I drove a bunch of houses. On Saturday I did title. On Sunday I comped them. Went to auction on Tuesday. I bought 2 houses. And it was like, holy crap, I was off to the races. Big thing I learned that time, I remember when I was broke in 2014, I was like, I made millions flipping houses. I flipped 1,000 houses. If I would have just kept 50 of those as rentals, I'd have been set for life. If I'd have just kept 10 of those for rentals. So my new mission starting in 2015 was to keep as many as I could as rentals. I'd buy 10, I'd flip 1 for down payments, I'd keep 9 as rentals. And now we have 850 single family rentals out here in Texas. Part of why I went big in Texas was I said housing prices will never go up. I didn't want to see those big swings again. But when COVID hit, housing prices went up. So the really big bet out here, 2015, 2016, I would just fly out every month, buy 10 houses, fly back. Now I live in Texas. I don't have to fly out here anymore. But that was my whirlwind journey of like learning how to like being a home builder and then losing it all. And then being a house flipper, doing really, really well, but not having any mentors about how to run my business and making all sorts of mistakes. I was making tons of money. I should have been set for life, but I didn't make good decisions. And then kind of my third reset was going back and saying, let's just do a bunch of singles. Let's just buy a bunch of houses as singles. And then in a few years, my life will be easy.
Did you say 850 rentals?
Yeah, so I've got 850 single family rentals that are all within about an hour and a half drive of Austin, Texas.
And
yeah, that's a lot, right? Like
starting in 2015, that's 120 houses a year.
Yep. And sometimes
Lord,
bigger batches, but that's exactly what I would do. I would fly out. I'd buy 10.
I'd say for anyone running the math on that, that's 10 a month, which is an insane number of flips to be managing, especially when you don't initially live in Texas. And I mean, obviously you grew into that. You didn't start at 10 on month 1, but I mean, that means at some point you were doing much more than 10.
Yeah, there was, and you know what's funny? At first it was like, I mean, I was traumatized in like 2013, 2014, 2015. Like I had big money and I had lost it all. And I was like worried about making my own mortgage. And so this time was like I was trying to avoid that. But sometimes it was tough because I would go through the work, I'd buy it, and I'd fix it. I'd put a renter in it, I'd put a loan on it. And my net income was like $100 a month for that house. And it was like, and the brain was going like, just flip this one again. Like, just do what you did last time. Just sell it as a flip. Make 20 grand. Like, you're barely eating right now. You're barely surviving. And it was boring. It was like, okay, I did a lot of work and now my cash flow goes up by $200 a month. It took a while to see the results in that bet. And It was one of these, and if I hadn't had such a crash in 2013, 2014, I probably would not have had the patience to stick with that. But it was like a second chance. I'd done it once before. And I had to scale up to it. There's lots of challenges with trying to fix houses out of state. Sometimes we still have challenges with it. There's ways that you grow into it and finding, good trades. And, at the beginning, the first several months, it was just me too. It would just be when I'd fly out, I'd go change the locks. I'd take pictures and then I'd go back. But the benefit of Texas compared to California, in California, auction was every day.
Oh, I thought you were about to talk about tenant friendly.
There's a million.
Not the only benefit. Taxes, other than property taxes.
Yes, but auction wise, the auction in California happened every day, but in Texas it's only once a month. So it was much easier to fly out there, never miss an auction, because you can't really do auction once a month in California. You'll show up on the one day nothing happens. So there's a bunch more things about the tenant laws in Texas are much better than California.
I live in Springfield, Missouri, and I invest locally, just kind of where I always was. It's similar to Texas, just more affordable still, although growing quickly right now. Not major hub, but fairly large hub, third largest city in Missouri. And right on two major highways and it's like a weird small town with 5 billionaires that nobody knows about, because it's like, oh yeah, nobody's heard of Springfield, Missouri. And then you're like, oh, but O'Reilly's is headquartered there, and Bass Pro and Kraft has a plant, and Budweiser and Amazon. And there's 4 or 5 billionaires that live here, in the largest privately owned trucking company in the nation. And so it's like, there's a lot of industries that all.
There's a lot of stuff. I spent some time in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and Bentonville this last year. My daughter had a medical issue that the doctor was there. So she lived there for 6 or 7 months. My wife and I took turns living up there. But that Bentonville was another place like that, where it's the home of Walmart. Yeah. Right. Bentonville's. So that's where the Walton family is. So that's one big thing. But plus there's big shipping companies and Tyson Foods, and there's all these different. I guess there's maybe 5, 6 giant companies, giant families.
Major university, that
are headed. The university was fun to drive through too.
My goodness, I'm running the math on I'm still in my head 850. There's a lot of questions that, while I want to, and we may come back to that, I'm curious, and this might be more timely just because of where things are right now as we record this in February of 23. As somebody who has 850 rentals and has exploded that over the last, 7 years, but is also been through the crash, what does your business look like right now? Are you still buying at that scale? Have you slowed down? I'm curious what your strategy is going into 23, especially because the Austin markets, from what I understand, slowed a little bit, but it's had a crazy last few year run up. I guess just kind of curious what your strategy is, what your outlook is for the next year or two, and then maybe we dig into the specifics of how you did. That's
as I get into thinking about what's going on right now in the world in real estate, because it's a big deal what's going on. It's very different. And as a piece of advice I give to listeners out there and investors and different people out there, I made 90% of I started doing, I got into real estate 20 years ago. I started my own business 15 years ago. I made 90% of my wealth in probably 30 months, 24 months of that in that. Now, I would say, 2010 was a big chance, but I lost all that wealth. But 2015, when I went really, really big, and I was first one buying and I was I'm going to go as big as I can, and I'll get as many houses as I can when I first discovered that market. And then 2021 was another one of those times where first 6 months of the year, I was hey, there's still a lot of runway here, and I'm going to buy as many properties as I possibly can. And so I was buying whole neighborhoods out. January 2021, February 2021. People had started to slow down a little bit because they were thinking, man, real estate really boomed last year. I don't think 2021 is going to be like that. And I went really big. And so I bought hundreds of units in the first few months of 2021. and which was a perfect, because by the end of 2021, when these housing developments were getting done, they were worth 25 to 30% more than I got them in contract for. I was able to get 100% financing, really, really good rates. And so the last like 6 or 9 months, it's kind of been this lull where, not much has been going on. I just had to do some major layoffs because for about 9 months I had staff and an overhead, and I was having a tough time, mentally saying like, hey, we don't have any flips coming in right now. When the rates went up, our business slowed way, way down. And so the point of telling people like, hey, there's like times in your life where if you go really big, that becomes this big opportunity. There's also times to be patient and wait.
Yeah.
Like be patient and wait for that good time. And what I started telling people back in October, November is I just need to make sure I don't lose any money over the next year or two while I wait for my opportunity to go big again, because there will be this moment where it's time to go really, really big. And so I decided in October, November, December to really cut back on my overhead to essentially just be able to collect on my rentals. I still have my team that's managing my rentals, but any sort of like the flips and the big kind of pops, like the buying the house and selling it right after we closed on it, quick stuff had slowed way down. We weren't doing really any of that. And I've had to mentally tell myself, I'm not going to see any really big pops over the next year. So what am I going to see? So one, the strategy was first tighten up shop, get really, really tight on all the expenses, and really get back into the foxhole myself. And people are like, what? Like last week I started driving foreclosures again that were scheduled for auction. I went to auction and I went and bought a house. And that in the past, that'd be something I'd have a bunch of team members doing that. But if I'm cutting down on overhead and I'm trying to get a really good understanding of what's actually happening with the market, I got to do it myself. So I can really, every time I built businesses and scaled them, I ran the businesses for a while myself so I could figure out what I thought the best practices were and then hire.
Yeah.
So fast forward, like, what do I think it looks like right now? I think today's real estate market looks just like it did in 2010 with like a couple slight variables. So in 2010, there was, thousands of houses on the market, let's say for $500,000 in an area in Sacramento, thousands of houses. But the only ones that were selling were ones that were selling for $300,000. So everyone wanted to buy every house. Like even those ones at $500,000, they were listed as short sales. They would all get multiple offers. But it would come to a point where the best offer that a first-time home buyer could afford would, let's say, be like $275,000, and the bank would say, no, we're not going to accept that as a short sale, and then the house would get foreclosed on. Right? And so how is that related to today? Because we're not having the crazy foreclosures that we were having back then. No, and like the crash that's happened, I think most of it's kind of already happened. We've had this giant correction, but we're not seeing it all on paper yet. So like, what does that really mean? Like so now in what we have in Austin is we have houses that were $500,000 last year are now listed at $400,000. When we put them on the market, we get multiple offers, but our best offer is like $320,000, $330,000. Like that's a big difference between the $500,000 it was and the $330,000. Now I'm a savvy investor. I wanted to say, I call myself that. I decided to list
850 is not enough reps. You're gonna have to do a couple more.
Yeah, I don't want to sound like an ass either, but it's like I think I'm smart.
That's not counting the hundreds you flipped on top of that, or any other house you've ever sold. So the 1,500 reps you've got in is just not going to cut it, Aaron. You're gonna have to do at least another 200.
I appreciate being able to say it here. So I was smart enough. I was like, hey, I'm smart enough to say, hey, instead of listing it at 500, I'm gonna list it at 400 because that's where the market is. And then the best offers I get are like 320. And so what that's showing me is it's just like 2010. In 2010, the banks did not want to sell it for the price that they were worth, right? They didn't want to accept a short sale for the actual price they were worth. They were still just gonna try to stick it out and hold it out. What we have right now is the same thing with sellers. So there's still a lot of sellers for that house that would be listing it at 500. And then there's some sellers like me that will list it at 400, but who is actually going to sell it at 320, at 330? Right? So where is the opportunity? What is the opportunity I'm finding right now? I think the opportunity is just like that 2010 opportunity where we had to buy foreclosures, fix them, and bring them to market at a price that people could pay. And so at that $320,000 price point. So that means, is it just foreclosures? There's all sorts of ways to buy like distressed housing at a discount.
Yep. There's
website. You can like build a website and have people come to you. You can do door knocking. You can do mailers. You can reach out to people that have liens on their houses. I do all sorts of different ways and show people all sorts of different ways to do that. But the biggest opportunity right now is buy a distressed property at a discount that there's something really, really wrong with, that there's still enough room to make a profit if you have to sell it at what today's true value is, which isn't what stuff is listing for, and it's not what it's going pending for, but it's what buyers can actually pay. And so I decided to try that experiment last week. I hadn't bought a house in like 9 months because I've been just kind of sitting tight. But I went to auction myself. I bought it at a price that I'll be able to make it turnkey and bring it to market for, $25,000 less than any other thing on the market. And it should be nicer. And, it'll go on the market next week. And we'll see if I'm going to get the action and the activity. What I have seen is first-time home buyers are still buying. Stuff priced really well. It's in good shape. Is still selling. It's kind of funny because people are like, this isn't like last time because of foreclosures and crashing and things like that. It's kind of like we bypassed the foreclosure crash of 07, 08, where we just had everything slow down so dramatically with rates that adjusted the pricing. Now people are like, we're not going to see the foreclosures that we saw before. That's true.
But I would agree with that.
We're going to see this, like the people that do get foreclosed on, or people out there that are distressed do have equity. We're not going to see the same amount of foreclosures because most people are like, well, I have equity and I have a really low rate, so they'll just find ways to pay it. Yeah. When somebody realizes, they think they have $300,000 in equity, right? I'm going to sell my house for $500,000. When they realize they can only sell it for $300,000, they go, oh, well, then I'm just not going to sell it. I'll just stay here forever because I have a 3.5% rate. I was going to do that so I could use $200,000. I was going to use $100,000 for this and $100,000 to go buy my next house. But if I don't actually have the equity, I'm just staying put. So
if they have to move with if they have to move with a 2.5%, 3.5% rate fixed for 30 years, then in Austin, even with the market coming down a little bit, they'll still be able to cash flow and hold it as a rental. Even in a worst case scenario, if they have to move, they could still do that over taking the hit. And so that's what I've been telling people is I don't think you're going to see the foreclosures because in people's worst case scenario, they should be able to make the payment with a renter, or they've got enough equity that they shouldn't be taking a massive hit to sell, or a combination, or even worst case on top of all of that, the assumable mortgages with the 2.5%, 3% make a new home buyer still appealing. There are buyers out there who would be willing to pay a little bit over the top for that rate over the current rate that they would qualify for. So there's so many options that make it, I think the foreclosure is much less realistic with the exception of maybe mass layoffs in some of these tech bubble areas. But we haven't seen that really, even with like they say Amazon and Google have had massive layoffs, but I haven't heard anything about it seems like a lot of them were remote jobs or even international jobs. So I don't know. But I interesting that you bring up. I like the way that you worded that. I like where you worded that banks aren't willing to sell for what the house is really worth. And I think that's interesting because a lot of people seem to forget in really intense sellers markets or buyers markets at the, when the pendulum swings really far one way or the other, people seem to forget the mantra that a house is not worth the listing price. It's worth what the buyer will pay and what the market dictates. And the bank doesn't determine that. And nothing determines that, but the market, the buyer, the sentiment, and you can list it for whatever you want all day long. In a buyer's market, it doesn't matter. And so I like the way you worded that.
And the appraisers try, and the appraisers try to say, like, because the other concept that all appraisals have used is saying, well, there was an identical house next door and sold for that. So they use the argument that if there's one person that's willing to pay that, there's two people that's willing to pay that. But in volatile times, it like all that gets thrown out the window. Like someone will send me a project that's like, we have a land project that the appraiser says that it's worth 1.5 and we can't get anyone to buy it for $1 million right now. Like it doesn't, and it's not that they were wrong. It's just that there isn't really a way to catch up. Like when the market starts changing quickly, there just isn't a way to really catch up.
Yeah. I've got a house right now that I know I'm underwater on. I knew I was water on it when I refinanced it. But so I had this house I renovated everyone who's listening knows I had a project manager who went whatever, and the project that we talked about where everything went south, and finally sold it 2 weeks ago. And anyway, there were some other projects involved in that timeline, and one of them was one that he had finished right as he got terminated and all this other stuff came out. And I listed it at 106, little a non-conforming third bedroom, but if you count that, a 3-1, and little house, not best part of town. The goal was just to flip it. The numbers that we had were off. The repairs were over. Everything, whatever. Just wanted to get out from under it. Listed at 106, had an offer, went under contract at 97 after like 3 weeks. FHA buyer, they lost their job, fell out of contract, relisted at 97, just to move it. Sat for 3 more weeks, and finally I was like, I'm just gonna call my bank and see what they'll do as a refi, and I'll just hold it as a rental because I just need to get out from under the private lender, whatever, just do the right thing, be done with this thing. And the freaking appraisal came back at 125, and so my bank will do 85% loan to value. So I now have a $107,000 mortgage on this house that I couldn't sell for 97. And I'm like, but I mean, it cash flows. Not much, but I mean, it holds its own, and it's, fixed for 25 years. And so I'm not really worried about it. And long term, that area is turning and it'll be fine, but it's just not a house that I wanted for any reason to keep. I was just hoping to just be done with it, but it's not a losing situation, but I just laugh because I'm looking at it and I'm like, so stupid. Like this is not the only house that I've had where I was like, oh, the appraisal came in way higher than I thought it would and probably should have. But like,
time isn't like the cool thing is in a few years, time is going to probably save that for you, or 5 years or 10 years. And you mentioned one of like the best things in the world about real estate, where it will be more difficult to find those sorts of things to happen right now. But like in 2021, it was, get it in escrow for $300,000. It would appraise for $400,000. So we would end up being able to refinance it. We'd pull out like, $325,000, and it's tax-free money.
Yep.
It's like the beauty of real estate. It's so amazing that when you're actually able to, it's like I used to be a flipper because I wanted the quick cash. And then I wanted to be a renter because when the spigot turned off, I wanted to have something safe. And the cash out refi that started, the first time I got to experience that was 2 years ago. I learned that from Blackstone. That's what Blackstone did in 2013, 2014, 2015 on just this massive level. That's when I finally understood they weren't actually about cash flow. They were about property and values going up. When they first said they were coming to compete with me, I was like, these aren't even good rentals. They're not going to do that. But what they knew was this house was $200,000 underpriced of replacement costs, and they were just going to start scooping up stuff at replacement cost and all that stuff. Yeah. So I was like, you could be a flipper or a renter. You can't be both. The cash out refis, you get to be both. You essentially get to sell it to yourself. You get the cash as if you sold it, but then the rental is the long-term cash flow. And it's just this really, really amazing balance. So good for you for doing that. I told you when we met too, like I've had a lot of great successes, but I had several really bad ones this last year. And where I'm going to lose a lot of money on that land deal from like earnest money that I used to tie it up. But I have to remind myself in 2021, I made a lot of money by doing the same thing. I paid earnest money on a bunch of properties to lock in a price. 9 months later, the house were worth 25% more, so I would close on it. Well, what happened to me this year is I paid earnest money on something a year ago. Well, now the property's not actually worth 25% more. It's actually not even worth what I had it in escrow at. And so I'm going to lose that earnest money. So I have to I get mad, I get frustrated. Oh, I made a big $200,000 mistake, but I have to remember that same method made me millions a year prior. So I just got to take the good with the bad. Like then if I flip 10 houses, I'm going to lose money on 1 out of 10 for sure. Now the 3 that I kind of got near in March, April, May this last year, those are all going to end up being losers by the time they close. I've been struggling like crazy with them. I'm going to lose money on all of them. But it's like, if I go back and look at the numbers of like the last 40 I probably only lost money on 4 or 5. It's tough when like 3 of them are right now when you're trying to, so you said like, what else is going on with my strategy right now? My strategy also is and a lot of real estate investors, is like clear the table and clear the slate with anything right now that could get worse, that might get worse, because the real estate market might get worse. It might not get worse. If it gets worse, you don't want to have any of these bad assets. So that could be something with a balloon payment that's due in like 2 years. That could be a flip that's like just been sitting but you don't want to cut the price, or you don't want to do that extra work to it yet. There's all these things. So look at like whatever you have in your portfolios, whether you got 1 house or 10 houses. Is there anything that could create some danger for me if the market does go down? Worst case scenario, if the market goes down. I'm trying to get rid of any of those right now. Because here's the deal. If the market goes down, gets worse, economy gets tougher, then I don't have to worry about those anymore. And if it gets better, essentially I'll regret it a little bit. Like, oh, I could have kept that and made money on it. But the cool thing is, if the market's fine, that means my old business plan will work again. Yep. My old business strategy will work again, and I'll be making tons of money again. So it's like, if you have anything out there that like might hold you down, like just get rid of it now. Like take the beatings, take the losses. It's like every time you do a layoff, right? When you do a RIF, you do a reduction in force. It's not fun. It's like the worst day ever. You go through and you're telling everybody like, hey, I know we felt like a family, and I know we've got this going on, and here's a severance check, but I can't afford to pay you anymore. And it's like the most heartbreaking moment of entrepreneurship. Yep. And then 2 months later, after all the severance payments have been paid, you have your first cash flow positive month again. And you're like, okay, now I can sustain this. Now I'm off to the race again. Now my new business plan set. So like rip the Band-Aid off. If you got anything that's creating some issues right now in strategy, rip the Band-Aid off and then stay patient and wait for your moment. Because there will be a big moment, and it may be one of those moments where you're able to go really, really big to create lifetime wealth over a 3, 6, 9, 12-month period.
Love it. All right, so I'm gonna ask you a couple questions about the portfolio because that's just nuts. First thing, and I'm curious, I don't know if this is safe to ask. So as GoBros, we're all super honest or super open. I don't know if you're cool, but if you are, and if not, I'll take it out. But
ask me anything.
Can I ask you your horizontal income on that?
Yeah, so I have a pretty healthy horizontal income.
I remember you saying that when we met.
Yeah. So right now I draw about $75,000 a month with another partner. I think sometimes now in 2020, 2021, we also had these big refinance, things that hit that also helped. That sometimes averages out into there. But yeah, so that's my horizontal draw check. After
not bad for passive.
So like that's passive. That's other people running the stuff. Now, once a week I meet with the team. It used to be more active because it's like self-managing. I don't hire property managers because I don't trust them. I think that
at that scale, you've got to do it yourself.
Sometimes you have to use them. I use them in some cities, but most of the time we don't. But what's really cool about that big old passive income number, David, is, man, it took me a long time and a lot of work. And my first year into it, by the end of year one, my passive was at like $5,000 or $6,000 a month. And I was still thinking like, man, I worked really, really hard this year. I flew to Texas every month for 5 days. So that's like, 60 days without my family this year, where I was working in a town I don't live in. Half the time I was changing locks myself, doing it. So at the end of the first year, I wasn't like, this was a really good plan. I was like, man, I hope this is a really good plan, because if I just sold a few of these, I would be able to like start flying in like better airlines again.
Yeah.
I'd be able to like eat some of the stuff, because remember in 2012,
Southwest is great. You get to pick whatever seat you want if you're first.
You get to pick your seat as long as you're on first. I mean, 2010, 2011, I was making so much money. I was wasting money. I didn't know what money was. I was a very bad steward of my money.
Yeah.
And then I remember saying, if I ever got another chance again, man, I would give so much more away, experience all these things I would do different. So, 2015, I'm just telling you, the number is big now, but it took working really hard the last 8 years. Very proud of it. I think anybody can do it as long as you're willing to just hit singles for a long time. Because like I said, at the end of that first year, I was still not convinced this was a good plan, and I had over 100 houses at that time. I mean, even the end of the second year, when I'm like 200 houses in, and you're learning the pros and cons of like owning your own property management company, and like you're having some tenants sue you, and like it's going right, but it's going wrong. And the stuff that's going wrong, you lose sleep over. I still wasn't like, this was a great idea.
When did you move to Austin in this process?
Yeah. So I moved to Austin in 2019. That was like the end of December 2019. That was like the best bet ever.
It was 4 years before you moved to Texas?
Yeah, 4 years. So flying, and part of it near the end, it was because I was like, I'm flying out here all the time now.
Man.
So that was one thing. It was so much travel. It was also like California income tax. By the time 2019 hit, in 2018, me and my family, we traveled all over the world. We pulled our kids out of school in 2017. We actually wrote a book about homeschooling through that process. But we we traveled around the world. I was only in California like 1 month in 2018, and I still got hit with this giant California income tax bill. So that was part of reason number one. But at that time, I thought I was going to live in California and in Texas. I just wanted to fly less. I wanted to not have the income tax thing. Well, COVID hit March 2020. We were in Texas. We were actually in Hawaii when it hit, came back to Texas. And 3 weeks later, I guess maybe 3 or 4 weeks later, in Austin, Texas, life was pretty normal. We were planning on being back in California by April to stay at our California house. And it wasn't normal there. And we came back in August 2020. We threw a big party with a bunch of GoBundance friends, a bunch of GoBros. And because we had a giant party ranch in California. And when people came over, several of them were like looking over their shoulders and they said, "Is it legal for us to be here?" And I said, "You haven't been anywhere since March?" And they said, "No, I haven't been anywhere since March." So that was like the nail in the coffin for us. It was like, all right, we're going to sell our property. We're going to sell the last of our California assets. We're not going to do anything anymore out there.
And I not to talk about me, but the 32nd, I was stationed at Camp Pendleton in Oceanside, California, 2019 summer to 2021 summer. And my wife, that last year and a half that I was in, had moved back to Missouri, took her old job until I got out. And so in March, I remember it. I don't think I'll ever forget it. So the Marine Corps has this way of putting you on. We call it duty. It's a 24-hour shift where you're in charge of the unit's main building, and you walk around and make sure everything's secure. It's whatever. It sucks. But it's 24 hours. You get to be awake, carry a gun around, and look important and angry and make sure things are locked. Super fun. Yeah. A lot of time to read and think and drink caffeine. I'm on 24-hour duty. The Marine Corps likes to put you on duty at like the worst times. Like it's always the joke. You check into a unit, you get like the 4th of July, Christmas Day, whatever. I turned 30 on March 14th. March 13th, I'm on 24-hour duty. So I'm like, woo, thanks, Marine Corps. And my wife and kids are flying into California March 14th. So I'm going to get off duty and go pick them up. And the night before is when like her school was basically like, if you leave the state, you got to take 2 weeks off work and all this other stuff. And so, I remember like watching how Missouri handled everything and how I was dealing with stuff in California. And I was like, this is just crap. Like I need to leave as fast as possible. So I can see why you would have stayed at that point.
Yeah.
That's just,
to really quick hit on that. We bought an RV in July 2020 and we started going from state to state. I went from Texas and we kind of went up north. We like went through Missouri. We went, we went up to Omaha, Nebraska. We came back through North South Dakota. Like we hit through 17 states, and it was amazing because everybody was so different. You'd go into some cities in some states and they said life is just normal. There's nothing going on here. No change, no anything. And you get into other states and it was crazy. And it was crazy and it was intense. And that was a really eye-opening experience for me, just in general of things of like what we were seeing, what we were seeing on the news and what we were being told. It really depended on the city and depended on the state. And it was just very, very different. And, I feel bad for the people that had some big struggles in their states, were pretty aggressive with some different things because in some places it was like nothing was happening. Yeah. And I think Missouri was one of the first we went to. There weren't any really restrictions when we went in through there.
No, other than hospitals. Yeah. And I remember like jogging, like I was training for a half Ironman in California and I would be like cycling and people would be like, "Where's your mask?" Like, what?
Because you cycled by them. Yeah, it was a weird time, dude. It was a weird time. And so the California was more extreme than my family wanted to be. So that became the sign for why I was going to finally like live in Texas the rest of the way. They miss the weather though. I tell you what, my family misses the weather. If I sell all my companies and I don't have to worry about taxes and politics as much anymore, who knows? Maybe I'll end up back in California if I don't go all the way to Hawaii.
I was going to say, you can get better. You can get that weather really without paying.
About living there too.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason people like California. It's just not the government. That's,
it's not taxes. They never thank for the taxes.
Yeah. Okay. So, man. All right. So that's crazy though for 4 years. So you scaled up this thing super quickly while living out of state. You built your own property management company. You're flipping a house and then you're holding as many as you can and you're flipping to make the down payments and then you learn the refi. I mean, we've unpacked, I feel like, a pretty decent amount of this and we don't have a ton of time. So I guess if I could sum up all the questions that everyone has. The thing that they all want is, the secret to getting rich quick, right? So I think the best question to ask for that is, what was the hardest, what do you think were the hardest things you learned, or the biggest lessons you took away from scaling and building that massive portfolio? Like, what if you could look back to yourself 20 years ago and be like, Aaron, you're a knucklehead. These are the 3 things that you need to know if you're going to buy a house. Don't screw this up.
Yeah, so one of these things I tell to all my new hires, and they always think that they might be the exception. So here's an example. To find the right paint, how do you scale and do hundreds of houses? Well, you need to get to the point where you have a painter that you trust, that you can just text him an address, and 2 days later the painting will be done. You need to have a carpet person that you can text, and 3 days later the carpet's going to get installed, and he knows what kind, and he knows the rate, and you got to have a window guy and a landscaper. And so you have to have all these people you can trust, because near the end, like what we have now, we buy a house, our system sends out an email to like 9 people, and in 6 days the house is ready for the market. It's been done by our specs. So one, we have to have like our set of specifications, what our house needs to look like. If any of you guys have flipped 5 or 6 houses, you could actually spend an hour, write down the specs you want the rest of your houses to be, and go do it, right? So it's one's with a spec sheet. 2 is with unit rates. Once you find people you trust, one of the problems with construction is you send someone out there, they want to go give you a quote, then they want to send it back to you, then you're going to negotiate, then you got to go get another quote. You can't scale like that. You got to have somebody you're like, this is their rate. I know it's a good fair rate. I'm always going to use them. And then I don't have to worry about like using other contractors. So you got to have these set people, right? And like, how do you find them? I remember once my landscaper in California, the very first house that she did with us, her little kids were in the car while she was installing the last planter. One of her kids was like in a pack on her stomach while she was like doing this final install. And maybe like the third house, they had sent me a quote for landscaping, and it was going to be $4,000 worth of sod. I approved it. All good. It's a house 2 hours from where I live. When she sends me the final invoice, she goes, hey, it was actually only $2,000. We didn't need any sod for the back. We were able to bring it back with fertilizer. Now, I would have never known any different if she would have just billed me $4,000. But I knew in that moment I could trust her for anything, because she was going to come back to me and say, hey, you already approved $4,000, but you only owe me $2,000. It's a big deal. So then she did 1,000 houses for us. And at the end, they had like 7 company trucks and lots of employees, because every house that we did, they did, plus they did other people. So they were like starting their business with us, and it really grew. I also had a window guy once on a sliding glass door. He's like my 6th window guy I was trying. There's a sliding glass door that had lost all of its like, whatever. It's like fading. It's coming apart. And I tell him to go replace it. He sends me a quote, $850. Cool, go do it. He calls me back and says, hey, I was actually able to get the manufacturer to cover that window under warranty. And they're going to send a replacement. Okay, cool. And he goes, and I also had one in my shop. So I'm just installing the one that I had in my shop for you for free. And when they send me the replacement, I'm going to get it in 2 weeks. You don't have to pay me anything.
Oh, man.
I've never used another window person, ever.
No, yeah.
Because he could have told me, he could have done the same exact thing and still sent me the $850 bill.
Yep.
His name was Joe Garza. Like, you're in Northern California, he's still doing windows, and he's an amazing, amazing guy. So, all right, so you have to find those trades. The other side of that, though, is you'll have to hire at least 10 before you get a good one. So you hire a painter, you say, here's our unit rates, here's how we're going to do it. They say yes or no, and then this one sucks. So and every time it happens, my employers are like, man, they didn't show up. I kept reminding them they didn't show up, or they did a bad job, or they didn't do it for the right price, or it took them 5 days instead. Every time you have to fire a trade, you are one step closer to the good one. So just know, like, you need to you're not looking to finish this house.
Mm.
You're looking to find a trade contractor that can do every house from now on with very little management. And so to do that, you have to try out 10, try out 20. So every time you have a bad trade, you're one step closer to the good one. The good ones are few and far between, but they're out there. But just know that your mission is to find this team that's going to do every one of your houses for the rest of your life in that area. So every time you have to fire somebody, that's great news, because they were not the person. You're one step closer to the person. And so every time I remind somebody, like, yes, it's going to take 10 painters before we find the good one. And they're like, well, this is our first house we're doing in San Antonio. Cool. Well, don't expect this painter to work out. And they're always telling me, no, this one's going to be different because I did this. Just trust me.
Yeah.
We're going to fire 10 guys before we find the right one, but we will find the right one. So don't get discouraged as you're doing that process.
I love that. That's so good. And it's funny because I always joke with people. I'm like, I'm the worst business owner ever because I'm not good at design. So I always just tell, I'm like, I want a contractor or a tile guy who calls me and says, what color tile do you want? And I'm like, you're the tile guy. That's your gig. That's what you're here for. You're so good that you know the thing, and you're the paint guy. I'm like, I want a team that's so good that I text them an address and the house gets built.
Yeah.
And, it makes me probably the worst business owner, but in some ways there's probably some perks to that. When it works, it works. And when it doesn't, oh my God, I'm a mess, but usually it works. So there's a lot more that goes into that, obviously, but I don't want to run the show off the timeline here. So my goodness, Aaron, there were some real nuggets in there and I appreciate it so much. And I'm really glad that we got to sit and have a much longer conversation than our 90 seconds of heat and fun in Tahoe. So thank you very much for joining me. First off, where can people get a hold of you? And second, how can I or the community add value to you? What would be if someone's looking to reach out to you, what would be a way that we can help?
Yeah, and thanks for having me on. And I'm sorry I was so long-winded on my story at the beginning. I know that eats up a lot of our time.
It's a good story.
It's a good story, but I always like, man, I should have gone more into tactics because everybody likes a good story, but what everybody really needs is tactics. If you guys need more tactics, right, go follow me on Instagram. I'm everywhere out there. People can email me, text me, Facebook. I am the most active on Instagram. It's my favorite method to meet people, to follow people, to share content. I record a lot of videos, a lot of clips about strategies that people should be following, what news to be following that's out there, how to flip a house, like lots of different things like that. So if you want to have any questions about anything, find me on Instagram. I've got a couple old videos on YouTube too of like where we taught our painters how to paint for our unit rates, or like how we did this huge, massive $30,000 flip in 4 days where it's gutted to the studs, and it's just to show people like how fast stuff can actually get done when you're using good teams. There's some fun content on there. I own a company called Foreclosure Listing Service. So if someone's in Texas, they want to buy foreclosures, go to flsonline.com. Or if you want to do like distress leads nationwide, I own a company called PropHawk. It's PROPHAWK. But the big thing on there is there's all sorts of ways for you guys to make money in real estate. Both those websites have good chat questions. So you could be asking our people like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Would this be a good site for that or not? If it's not ours, they'll tell you where to go. There's plenty of free places out there too. There's lots of ways to do work but yeah, find me on Instagram, ask me some questions. I'm trying, what am I doing big right now? I also have the podcast, Real Estate Rockstars podcast. That's mostly for real estate agents. But if you're an agent or thinking about being an agent, I think it'll add a whole lot of value in your life. But what I really like is people listen to my podcast, finding me on Instagram and telling other people about the story, and then listening. And if I add any value for you, send me a message. There's probably a bunch of questions that David wanted to ask that I was too long-winded. So come ask him on there. I'll record a video when you ask me. I'll tag David in it. We'll try to get the answers out to you guys for something else, since we used up a little bit too much of our time in here.
Oh, the show was great. And for anyone who didn't catch it, that was at Aaron Amuchastegui for the Instagram, and it will, of course, be in the show notes with everything else. And brother, thank you very much for joining us today. This was awesome.
David, thanks for your time, dude. A lot of fun getting to know you.
Absolutely. Right back at you.